You have another great quote which says, "In my book, the ATP synthase should be as symbolic of life as the double helix of DNA." Now that you mention it, this is my book, and it is. I really, I really liked that quote.
I'd forgotten that.
For people that haven't heard of ATP synthase before, describe its importance in life.
So ATP, I don't know how many people are familiar with ATP. It's taught in schools and so on. It's usually just described as the universal energy currency, and it's a molecule with a tail of 3 phosphate groups, which are kind of an odd way of going about things, but that's how it works across all of biology. And if you want to make DNA, or you want to make RNA, or you want to make proteins, all of them are using ATP to do it. And all of them have this tail of the 3 phosphates. So it's a really interesting question. How do you get there? Now, the ATP synthase is basically adding that tail, or at least adding the last bit of the tail. So it's converting ADP, which is the diphosphate, into ATP, which is the triphosphate. So you're adding 1 phosphate onto that tail, and it's doing it. I say it's a rotating motor. It sits in the membrane. The membrane's got a charge across it, and the charge is really produced by pumping protons. So this is the nucleus of a hydrogen ion across the membrane. So on one side, you've got a reservoir of protons. You could think of it almost like a hydroelectric power scheme with the reservoir on one side. The membrane is like the dam. And the ATP synthase is like the electrical turbine. And as the protons are flowing, like water would flow through the turbine, you're powering its rotation. And that's causing a mechanical change in the protein. And the mechanical change is adding that phosphate group on to make ATP from ADP. So it's a kind of a crazy device. It's stunning. It spins at about 500 rotations per second, up to about 500. And it's exquisitely organized. The speed at which it rotates depends on the electrical potential across the membrane. So there's all, people have spent their whole careers working on how this thing works. And so it's really symbolic of, not of the informational side of biology, but of the functional side of biology. How do cells make a living in the world? And yes, you need genes to do that, but cells are entities that have a lot of moving parts. And those moving parts are what powers all the work that enables a cell to make a copy of itself. And the ATP synthase is possibly the most symbolic protein that's really driving all of the energetics of a cell into powering growth and reproduction and copying of DNA and RNA. All the work that a cell is doing is pretty much powered by that astonishing molecule. And one of the questions for the origin of life is, well, how do you get to that point? Yes. There must have been ways before you have this complex molecule of driving ATP synthesis. And one of the nice things about a hydrothermal vent is you've got the structure, you've got the cell-like structures, you've got acidic oceans full of protons, got alkaline fluids in the vents, and so you've got a natural gradient. You didn't have to pump protons out; they're out anyway, and they can come in and drive work. And the work doesn't have to be an exquisite rotating motor. That work, actually, the earliest work I think was making CO2 and hydrogen more reactive, so that they will break down those kinetic barriers to their reaction and react to form organic molecules. So the original work that the proton gradients were doing was nothing to do with ATP. It was all to do with making more of yourself, making more organic molecules. And you kind of build up from there. By the time you got to selection, now you can add an ATP synthase. Now you've got a system which is capable of honing an exquisite molecule like that.
Is it fair to say that the geochemical environment is what was able to stabilize all of the intermediates in the biochemistry? So the biochemistry one of the problems with evolution is that you have all of these intermediate states that need to be stable on their own before you get to the magnificent endpoint, right? But the fact that this biochemical system was able to lean on the geochemistry components, it was able to kind of build it step by step and then slowly become less reliant on the geochemistry as it built component by component. And the geochemistry of the whole thing made everything stable step by step. It was always a more stable configuration over time.
That's pretty much it in a nutshell, yes. I think the it's not necessarily stability so much as replenishment, is turnover. I mean, one way I've thought about a hydrothermal system is we tend to see ourselves as physical beings, and it slightly masks the idea that, well, if you put a plastic bag over your head, you'll be dead in about a minute and a half. So why? Well, because we are inside all of our cells, we are respiring, and that respiration is providing the energy that keeps us alive. So where in our cells? Well, it's the mitochondria. It's this ATP synthase that we've just been talking about. That is driving all the work. How is that powered? Well, that is powered by effectively breaking down food, bringing it into the mitochondria, these powerhouses in our cells that were bacteria once, and effectively stripping out the electrons and the protons from those molecules. You have then a current of electrons flowing to oxygen, so we have to have a cardiovascular system which is bringing in oxygen in the lungs, into the blood vessels, and then delivering it to all the cells and into the mitochondria. So now we've got at one end the electrons, at the other end the electron acceptor, which is oxygen. Current of electrons, that current of electrons is powering the extrusion of protons across the membrane. So now we have a charge on the membrane because protons have a positive charge. That charge is in the order of it's about 180 to 200 millivolts, but the membrane is very, very thin. It's about 5 millionths of a millimeter thick. So if you were to shrink yourself down to the size of a molecule and stand next to that membrane, the field strength that you would experience, the force field that you would experience, is about 13 million volts per meter, which is the same as a bolt of lightning. So you've got this huge force field across this membrane, and it's that that's driving the spinning of the ATP synthase. It's that that's driving the production of ATP and all the energy that's going on in the cell. So we are big physical beings, but get right down inside the cells, and we have this continuous flow, the continual delivery of electrons to the mitochondria, the continual transfer of them onto oxygen, the continual pumping of protons. And the reason, if you put a plastic bag over your head, that you die is you're no longer able to deliver the oxygen or the substrates to the mitochondria. So we are a continuous chemical reaction.
Yes.
And if you think about a primordial soup in relation to that, well, what is the continual chemical reaction there? There isn't really one in a comparable sense. If you think about a hydrothermal vent, you've got a continual flow. It's like having a kind of geological cardiovascular system that's continually providing you with the electrons that you need to react with in the case of a vent, CO2 rather than O2, to make organic molecules. So you've got this system which is capable of continual replenishment of what you need to be living. So it's not really stability so much as continuity.
Right.
This kind of the driving forces that are going to keep on making things, keep on growing, keep on driving growth. Where does this, if you're thinking about why does one cell want to become two cells, which is a famous question, and why would things grow at all? Where does that impetus come from? It simply comes from the Earth being a giant battery with all the electrons down there coming out, driving this reaction. It's doubling is almost inevitable in a hydrothermal system. Growth is just an outcome of these two phases that are constantly reacting with each other.
I think you just cleared up a very big misconception that I had as well. That you said that ATP synthase dates basically all the way back to Luca. For some reason in my head, I had ATP synthase evolving around the same time as mitochondria and the Great Leap.
No, it goes way back before mitochondria.
Right.
Yes.
I had never separated the two in my head. For some reason, I had always assumed that during that Great Leap, and we can kind of jump to that now, I think we can leap to that point now, I always assumed that ATP synthase evolved then because you needed the mitochondrial pump, that artificial proton gradient. But you're saying that gradient comes from the hydrothermal events. Therefore, ATP synthase definitely massively predates it by billions of years, not just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, bacteria, so mitochondria were bacteria once, and they brought with them all of the machinery for respiration, including the ATP synthase. And all archaea pretty much have exactly the same kit. It's a little bit different. If you look at the structure of the ATP synthase in archaea compared to bacteria, there are some obvious differences, but still, it's a rotating motor with the same components.
Right.
It works in the same way to do the same job, and there's no question that the common ancestor of those two things had a motor that was doing that. And it is the most exquisite molecular machine, right up there with the ribosome, and almost as ancient as the ribosome. But logically, the machine that makes the proteins that can be selected has to come before the ATP, which is one of the machines which is being selected.
Incredible.